meeting for, thanks very much, Moon. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. You're joining us at the Focus Area Round 3 meeting for the Long Island City Neighborhood Plan. We're excited to get into discussing things with you this evening and presenting out the draft land use framework that we're excited to share with folks. Before we get into that, though, I do have a couple announcements, and I'll be handing it over to give some welcome remarks as well in a moment. Before we get to those welcome remarks, I will note that at this evening's meeting, there is interpretation available. I'm going to have the interpreters at this time come up and please unmute yourself and announce for folks who may need to use interpretation services that this is available. So I'm going to start off with Sylvia, please.
如果今天在线上的所有参与会议的人员需要中文翻译，请在下面的对话框可以点选中文。那等一下你进到这个对话框以后，全程的这个会议呢会有中文翻译。谢谢 ，Thank you.
Thanks, and I'm going to go to Madeline.
Si necesita interpretación, presiona el icono que ve en la pantalla que aparece, es un globo.
Thank you. And now I'm going to go to Fatiha.
This is Mira. I'm also Bengali. I'm going to tell.
Thank you very much, Mira.
আমার নাম মীরা, আমি বাংলায় অনুবাদ করব। আপনাদের যদি কারো বাংলায় অনুবাদের প্রয়োজন হয় আপনারা আমাকে এখানে কল দিতে পারেন, চ্যাট করতে পারেন, ওখানে আমি আপনাদের উত্তর দেব। ধন্যবাদ।
All right, thank you all. So at this time, Moon, if you can please open up the interpretation channel and put folks in there. You know what to do. If you're in need of interpretation, please hit the interpretation function on Zoom. Now, before we get into the rest of this evening's presentation, I first want to just hand it over for some opening remarks, and I'll first go to Council Member Julie Won.
Thanks so much, Bahij. Good evening, everybody. It's so good to see you all. Thank you for joining our focus area meeting. My name is Julie Won. If we haven't already met, I represent Long Island City, Sunnyside, Woodside, and Astoria in the New York City Council. Our 1LIC project is a comprehensive community planning process to drive investments and plan for Long Island City's long-term future. So far, we have had 8 meetings with almost 1,000 attendees, over 3,200 comments collected, and we have hosted our first town hall in November of last year. We hosted 6 focus area meetings between December and February, and hosted our second town hall in April. And now we're hosting our 3rd round of focus area meetings right now. So to say in short, instead of the usual 60 days that the ULURP process for land use usually allows for our community engagement, we are now taking more than 365 days to make sure that we are continuing to have collective engagement and community feedback on how we use our public land as well as private land. And there will be more engagements coming up in the next fiscal year, and we will have another town hall in June. Tonight's meeting, our focus area meeting, will focus on city's proposed plans to use land use and zoning to address priorities that we've heard from you, such as new affordable housing, new parks and green spaces, waterfront access and resiliency, transit-oriented development, new schools like middle schools that we have been hearing from you, and community facilities, and a thriving industrial business zone and arts sector. Land use and zoning can be very technical, but they are fundamental to how our city shapes our neighborhoods. And the proposal presented tonight is just a start. We want to hear from you on how these zoning changes will affect your neighborhood. And this process will continue on at the town hall in June, and there will be much more. And just rest reassured, even if this is your first project that you're engaging in for land use and you may not be familiar with all the terminologies, our partners at like Bahij from WXY as well as DCP are very well versed as urban planners, and they're going to break it down for you in Zoning 101 so that everyone can be on the same page. And know that everything presented today is a preliminary draft. Nothing that is being shown today is set in stone. It's not concrete. This is really to get a reaction from you and engagement to hear back from the community on what you would like to see. And I also want to make sure that you understand everything that will be presented on. There will be justifications on why DCP has chosen these proposals. So if you see anything that you disagree with, feel free to give us feedback directly to the team here and to our office. And please visit licplan.nyc.com, licplan.nyc for more information and to sign up for more updates. And back to you, Bahish. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councilmember One. And I'm now going to hand it off to Hikyang Yang from the Queens Department of City Planning Office.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Hae-Kyung Yang. I'm from, as Bahish said, Department of City Planning and Project Manager to the One LIC study. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this public engagement meeting where we're aiming to foster open dialogue on specific topics, especially around land use. Public engagement is the cornerstone of community decision-making process. Your insights, experiences, and feedback are invaluable as we work together to address the challenges and opportunities before us. This meeting is an opportunity for everyone to share their thoughts, ask questions, and contribute to a productive discussion. Thank you to Councilmember One for being a partner to this comprehensive planning work. And thank you, WXY, for coordinating with us to produce work and set up virtual space that is not only beautiful, but also engaging. We look forward to everyone's participation and eager to hear from you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, both. All right, now let's get into things for this evening's presentation. I'm going to first share my screen. Hopefully everybody can now see. So I don't believe I introduced myself properly at the beginning. My name is Bahish Chansey. I'm the Director of Planning at WXY Studio, and we are working with the Department of City Planning and the Council Member's Office on this planning work in Long Island City. All right, so as we get going here, so here's an agenda. Tonight we're going to be going through the following topics and a little more detail on that. So the purpose of this focus area meeting is to talk about land uses, where residential, commercial, industrial, community facility, and any mix of those uses will be allowed. At our next town hall, we'll expand on today's land use framework to focus on a zoning proposal, including details on density, height, bulk, and urban design. At this evening's meeting, we're going to share where we are in this process, a bit of zoning basics and what it takes for the city to make land use changes. We'll share the draft land use framework and how it relates to the community recommendations that we've heard from you. And then we'll jump into discussion groups to workshop that framework. So a bit of overview for the folks who may be joining us anew. One LIC is a holistic planning process to gain input and build consensus on key neighborhood challenges and opportunities toward the development of a Long Island City neighborhood plan. In addition to land use changes, the neighborhood plan will include investments in city programs and facilities to ensure that we can center quality of life for existing and new residents in Long Island City. The study area that's outlined here in red is part of the neighborhood that's being considered for land use changes. We are excited to share the draft land use framework for this area with you this evening and to discuss how changes to the existing zoning in the study area can address some of the community's recommendations. While zoning changes would only be proposed for that study area, the neighborhood planning process will result in a package of strategies from multiple city agencies that may apply throughout this larger context area that's outlined in this gray dotted line here. So we are coming off of a productive town hall meeting in April where we shared community recommendations, which were a summary of all the ideas that we've heard. Today, we are in round 3 of those focus area meetings. Before we get into this evening's topic of zoning, let's zoom out and see where we are in the context of the overall neighborhood planning process. If we look ahead to the end of the process, there will be 3 outcomes that together will support and enable the community's recommendations. Those are, first, new policies, second, new zoning and land use regulations, and third, new programs, services, and capital projects. How do we get there? Right now, we're at that green dotted line. Since October, we've had 8 public meetings. We've joined the community at tabling events and received ideas and questions submitted online, via email, and at licplan.nyc. In June, the city will share a set of draft strategies for LIC that is responsive to the community recommendations. These draft strategies will include proposals to change the zoning regulations, as well as initial strategies for non-zoning investments in the city that the city can make in LIC. After June, we will begin working on parallel tracks, track 1 on zoning changes and track 2 on other neighborhood investments. For the zoning changes, we'll start with the environmental review process, where we work to analyze the potential impacts of the proposed zoning changes on a variety of topics, including schools, transportation, environmental quality, and public health. That land use framework will be refined and shared in greater detail at the next public meeting in June in the form of a zoning proposal. Once the environmental review begins, city agencies will begin developing the package of non-zoning proposals for new policies, programs, services, and capital projects that will accompany zoning changes, and which are needed to support the neighborhood as it grows. City agencies have heard the community recommendations you all have shared so far. Using those ideas, each agency will identify what specific policies, programs, services, and projects they can put forth to support the neighborhood. There will be additional public meetings beyond this summer focused on developing those non-zoning strategies that will ultimately be adopted as city commitments. These zoning and non-zoning tracks will advance at the same time, and they'll come together in the draft neighborhood plan. That's a holistic community plan where changes to zoning and non-zoning local investments can be considered together. This will mark the beginning of the public review process, formally called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, or ULURP. Through ULURP, community boards, the borough president, city planning commission, and the city council all weigh in on that plan. At the end of that public review process, we will arrive at a neighborhood plan that bundles those changes to zoning with the capital, program, policy, and service commitments. Once that neighborhood plan is out, city agencies would be required to provide updates on the commitments on an annual basis. And I know there's a lot in here and there's a lot in this presentation. I will note we're recording, it'll be posted to the website, and the presentation will also be posted to the website after this. So a bit of summary on the engagement so far. As Councilmember 1 noted, so far we've had 8 large public meetings, including 2 town halls and 6 focus area meetings. We've received over 3,200 public comments, including your hopes for the plan, your concerns, your challenges that you want to see addressed, and much more. These are all of the 39 draft community recommendations that we shared at Town Hall 2 in April. We've heard so much about your hopes for the neighborhood through this process. We've heard requests for improved coastal resilience, for capacity, accessibility, and reliability improvements to transit, for new public waterfront access and amenities, hopes for investments in LIC's unique arts and cultural scene, hopes for a new public middle school to ensure that families can stay close to home, and investments and repairs at Queensbridge houses. Going forward for the rest of this year and into next, city agencies will develop specific policies, programs, services, and capital investments that will accompany the zoning changes we're starting to discuss tonight that address those community recommendations. All right, folks, time for a bit of a zoning pop quiz and a land use primer. I hope you've studied up. We're going to ask folks to answer along with us as we go through a couple questions here and provide a little bit of foundational basics about land use. You can open this up and follow along in this quiz by either scanning that QR code on the screen with your phone, or you can open up a browser if you're on your phone or computer and you go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter the code that you see on screen now. That code is 15494262. I'm going to give folks a moment to gather with us there on the quiz, and then I'm going to switch over to that. So folks, if you're having any trouble with this, it's optional too. You're not forced to take the quiz. It's mostly a primer on zoning knowledge. If you'd rather just follow along on screen, that's totally all right too. But if you want to join the quiz, please scan the QR code with your phone or go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter this code 15494262. All right, I'm going to switch us over to the quiz then. So first off, let's go into presentation here. So first off, our first question, how familiar are you overall with the New York City zoning code and land use regulations? So I'm seeing that some folks are starting to make it in here. And again, that code, if you want to join, is at the top of the screen still. I'm seeing there's some folks in the room, looks like the largest grouping here is somewhat familiar with what's going on with the New York City zoning code and land use regulations. We have a good number of folks who are very familiar. We'll be glad to have your expertise in the discussions this evening. And a few folks who are not so familiar with the zoning code. That's all right. It's super opaque and hard to understand. We planners have trouble with it sometimes too. We are going to give a few of the basics this evening so that everybody who's entering the conversation can enter that on the same page. All right. So starting off, New York City's ability to regulate land use and to enact zoning rules is derived from the New York State Constitution and statutes. The scope of authority is limited to regulating use and bulk. This generally means that zoning rules that we enact or change or enforce must directly relate to the types of activities, the uses that happen in the building, whether that be residential, commercial, industrial, and the shape of the building itself, so the bulk of the building. The city cannot create or enforce rules that are beyond that authority, and any changes must go through a process that's set forth in the city's charter. Another important legal requirement is that zoning must conform to a well-considered plan. This means that there must be a robust land use rationale for any changes. A change cannot be arbitrary, and it must make sense in the context of the land uses and built form in the area. There's different types of activities that might occur in a building, and those are categorized into land uses. So residential uses include all kinds of homes, from single-family houses to apartment buildings. Community facilities are things that serve residential populations. Those include schools, libraries, healthcare facilities. Commercial uses include different types of offices, restaurants, retail, or shops. And industrial uses are things like warehousing, construction supply, film production, and all different kinds of manufacturing. On a zoning map, you will see districts with letters like R for residential, C for commercial, M for manufacturing, and MX for mixed use. Despite their names, these districts allow for more than just that one land use. For example, R districts allow housing as well as community facility uses like schools. In C, commercial districts, community facilities and commercial uses are allowed, and residential uses are also allowed in some C districts. M, manufacturing districts, allow for a wide range of both commercial and industrial uses, as well as some community facility uses. Residential uses are not permitted, but that wide range of commercial could include things like offices in a manufacturing district. And mixed-use districts are the most flexible, allowing for any or all kinds of these kinds of uses together, depending on the district. MX districts are a special type that we have here in Long Island City. They pair residential districts and M districts together. MX districts typically permit all kinds of land uses, residential, community facility, commercial, and light industrial. These uses can exist side by side or within the same building. They include regulations to limit potential conflicts between those different uses. All right, our next question. Do you all know what the letters FAR mean in the context of land use and zoning? So please go to your browser, go to your phone, and let us know if you know what FAR stands for. And unlike the last one, there is a right answer here. I'll give folks a minute to submit their answers. Oh, nobody's fallen for the dummy one here. All right, folks. I see folks seem pretty familiar with the New York City zoning code. If you know what FAR is, then you've seen something about zoning before, I'm sure. All right, so just so folks are satisfied on this, I'll reveal the right answer here is floor area ratio. However, It is not just the allowable building square footage floor area ratio, as we'll see, is the built floor area over the lot area. So if you answered that, you're right. This is the primary metric that zoning uses to control density. It's the ratio between the built floor area and the lot area. The same FAR can be arranged in different ways on a site, depending on how much of the lot area the building occupies. So here's 3 examples you can see in this kind of white sketched up building. All 3 of those examples have an equivalent FAR of 2.0. So you could have 2 floors covering the whole lot, 4 floors covering half the lot, 50% of the lot, or 8 floors covering 1/4 of the lot. Those would all have the same FAR. All right, folks, next up. Which of the following is true about M districts? I'm not going to say what M districts mean. Hopefully folks are paying attention. And I will say select all that apply. There's multiple right answers on this one. All right, we're up to about 15 responses. I'm going to wait till that ticks a little bit higher as we've gotten a couple more participants in the last couple questions. All right, folks, I'm going to reveal the right answer to this one. So the 2 correct answers here is 1, that they allow a wide range of commercial and industrial uses as of right. As of right means they don't need to change any of the rules. They can go ahead and do that. And then 2, they do allow for offices, retail, restaurants, and breweries in most M districts. If you answered the other ones, unfortunately, I gotta say, those were not correct in this question. It does not allow businesses to use the sidewalk for their operations. They are not the same as industrial business zones, which we'll cover, and they don't only permit manufacturing. As we've seen, they also permit commercial. So industrial business zones, one important thing, we covered what an M district is. I just want to emphasize an M district, a manufacturing district, is not the same as an industrial business zone. Industrial business zones were created in 2006 to support the industrial and manufacturing businesses in New York City. You'll hear us call them IBZ. They provide a tax credit to industrial businesses that locate in the zone, and the city has committed to not allow new residential in these areas. There are 21 IBZs across the city, including here in Long Island City. All right, let's see. Do you know what zoning can control about a building? And again, select all the answers that are right in this one. Okay, we've got a close tie between 2 pretty solid answers here, and a few folks on a few other options. Give it a couple more seconds before I reveal to you the truth of what zoning can control. All right. All right, let's see. Oops. There we go. So zoning can control bulk regulations of new buildings. That's things like density. We'll talk about that. It can also encourage certain uses in exchange for granting more density. Some things it can't do, I will describe in a second. So a little bit on density and form controls. So we already talked about FAR. The zoning resolution includes a variety of other ways to control building form. Zoning can do things like regulate the maximum height of buildings. It can require a setback from the lot line to expand sidewalk space. So you have to build the facade of your building a little bit back from the edge of the private lot. It can require building facades to step back at designated heights, which can help maintain a consistent street wall when shorter and taller buildings are next to each other. And it can also incentivize certain uses, such as community facilities. All right, another one. What can't zoning control about buildings function? Again, select all that apply. Did pretty well on the last one. I think this is a pretty zoning educated group. Okay, we got answers across the board so far here. I think we're going to surprise a few people when we reveal what zoning can and cannot do. All right. All right, last chance to get your answers in, folks, before I go ahead and reveal the correct answers on this one. Okay, so the things zoning can't do from this list, it cannot require 100% affordable housing, regulate commercial rents, require certain businesses to be in a place, or require existing buildings to conform to the new code. So a little bit more on that. There's a lot of things zoning can and can't do. So it can do a lot, like we've talked about. Zoning can control a building's form. It can also control what uses are allowed. It can incentivize certain uses and activities by allowing for more density, and it can require that new residential development include a percentage of income restricted housing. There's also a lot zoning cannot do. Many of these restrictions are because the government cannot simply take private property away or so strictly reduce what somebody is allowed to do on their own property that it loses a lot of its value. So zoning can't require private developers to build 100% affordable housing. It also cannot require a building to only make certain kinds of units, like all 3-bedroom apartments. It can't force existing buildings to change to new rules. So if your lot is rezoned, it's up to the building owner whether or not they want to change anything. It doesn't force anybody to do that. Zoning can't dictate a certain architectural style, and it can't regulate commercial rents or set things like construction wages. And finally, as much as folks may want to see a Trader Joe's put exactly in a certain place in LIC, zoning cannot dictate where a specific business is located. Okay. So one of the important things about zoning that we want to make sure folks understand is MIH, or mandatory inclusionary housing. If the city upzones a district where residential uses are allowed, this requires any new or redevelopments to set aside 20 to 30% of the apartments as permanently affordable income capped housing. Since MIH is based on a proportion of a building's total units, the more apartments in the building, the more affordable units there will be as well. And finally, our last question here, open scale. How many miles of publicly accessible waterfront are in New York City? Okay. Some people have some pretty low hopes here. So between 0 and 1,000 miles, how many miles of New York City waterfront is accessible? All right, I'm going to reveal and move us on. All right, so the correct answer is 520. I see there was a little preponderance of folks who did end up guessing that correct number. All right, so in addition to the zoning districts I described, New York City has waterfront zoning along its shoreline. Waterfront zoning requires that when some types of new development occurs, publicly accessible open space will be provided along the waterfront. That publicly accessible open space can have requirements, including a shore public walkway, an open path, a supplemental public access area, and upland connections that maintain physical or visual connections to the water. A waterfront access plan, a WAP, adapts waterfront zoning regulations to the specific conditions in the area. LIC has an existing waterfront access plan that was created over 20 years ago. That WAP did not anticipate the vibrant mixed-use neighborhood that we have today, one that has limited open space and significant flooding risks. All right, folks, thanks for following along in the zoning pop quiz. We're going to head back to the main thing and talk about the draft land use presentation. All right, so we've got the basics covered. We're going to dive into the framework. So the focus of today's meeting is the proposed land use framework. To that end, we're going to focus on the community recommendations that can be advanced by making changes to existing zoning and land use regulations. Those are highlighted on this slide. As we go through the draft land use framework, we will share how these recommendations may be advanced with zoning. And like I said, we're not forgetting about those other community recommendations. We're just working with city agencies to come up with the package of the full set of city investments that can help advance those. So as we recall, zoning must reflect a well-considered plan and regulate use and bulk. The proposed zoning framework we share results from a number of factors. The city has listened to what we've heard from you all through this process, in past processes, and through other channels. The city has heard your hope for more housing and permanently affordable housing. We've heard your hope to encourage business growth and greater activity in the industrial business zone. We understand your hopes for more public open space and waterfront access, and for greater flexibility and more mixed uses. In the context of New York City overall, the city believes that LIC is ideally positioned to support growth and investments. Depending on where you begin, LIC is within a 45-minute journey by public transport for more than 3 million people in New York City and the tri-state area, making it the single most accessible neighborhood outside of Manhattan. The city believes that additional density is appropriate in the majority of the study area for all uses: residential, community facility, commercial, and industrial. Density should be located near transit, in places that can support higher density like wide streets and along the waterfront. And the city believes that there are some areas that are currently off limits for new residential that are in fact appropriate for residential. These areas are outside of the industrial business zone. There are opportunities to support business growth and flexibility and to increase the number of accessible jobs here. And there are exciting possibilities to open waterfront access to the public and build a more resilient waterfront that helps protect the community from flooding. So let's first review the existing zoning in the area today so we understand what changes are being proposed. The majority of the area, as you can see, is shaded in purple. That means that it is zoned for low density buildings that are where a wide range of commercial and industrial uses are permitted. The center of this area and a couple of blocks in the very north within the purple dotted line are within an industrial business zone, or an IBZ. Small portions at the edges that are shaded in orange at Court Square, on the water, and near Annabelle Basin allow for a mix of residential and non-residential uses. The light manufacturing districts in this area range from M13 to M15. Most of the area is M14, which is a low density district that allows industrial and commercial uses up to a maximum FAR of 2.0. Some blocks near the 59th Street Bridge are M15, a medium density district that allows also industrial and commercial uses up to a higher FAR of 5.0. No new residential uses are permitted anywhere in those purple areas. So during this process, we've heard from you that this large area's lack of mixed uses leads to inactive and unsafe streets. And we've also heard from businesses that hope to expand but are limited by low density zoning. 2 areas to the north of the study area at Queensbridge Houses and 1 to the south along Vernon Boulevard, Jackson Avenue, and 21st Street allow for medium density development comprised of residential or community facility uses. At Queensbridge Houses, these are the 6-story Tower in the Park style NYCHA buildings. In the south, this includes old and new residential buildings of roughly 3 to 7 stories. Along Vernon Boulevard, commercial overlays also allow for retail and shops at the ground floor. These areas are outside of the study area and will not change under the proposal. The largest district in this area is the Long Island City Mixed-Use District. The densities allowed throughout this area vary, and a mix of residential, community facility, commercial, and light industrial uses are allowed. There are 4 sub-districts in the LIC Mixed-Use District that we'll go through now. The Dutch Kills subdistrict, outlined in green, allows for a mix of low to medium density buildings with residential, community facility, commercial, and industrial uses. Queens Plaza is a mix of medium to higher density buildings that are allowed, with higher densities around transit hubs and around Court Square. The Court Square subdistrict allows for high density residential, community facility, and commercial development. This is supported by the transit hub here that makes it a convenient place to live and to work. And south of the study area in the Hunters Point subdistrict, a mix of low density commercial and industrial and medium density housing is permitted. The mixed use areas allowed here enable homes, businesses, and shops to co-locate along corridors like 11th Street. So I will give folks one more look at today's zoning, the existing zoning in the area, before we switch to share the land use framework. So the reveal. So here is the city's proposed draft land use framework in the area. This is what we'll workshop tonight. We look forward to working with you on this. The city is proposing to increase density in nearly all of the study area, everywhere shaded in a color: purple, red, orange, dark yellow. However, this would not be applied uniformly. Densities would differ based on land use rationale principles. More density can be accommodated around transit nodes and corridors, along wider streets or the waterfront, and in areas that are close to other high density development. There should be transitions between higher density areas and lower density. In areas where residential is currently permitted today, densities would be increased. New residential uses would be permitted in most of the areas outside the industrial business zone that are currently zoned for just commercial and industrial use. When we allow residential where it's not currently allowed, or when we increase permitted residential density, we can legally map mandatory inclusionary housing. MIH will require that a percentage of new housing built is permanently income restricted. This will support community recommendations to increase the number of permanently affordable homes. The industrial business zone will continue to prohibit new residential development, but will allow for greater flexibility and encourage growth by increasing the permitted densities for commercial and industrial uses. This is in response to recommendations that call for new and expanded space for job growth. And the community recommendations called for exploring tools to support manufacturing and arts uses. The zoning framework responds to this with the industrial preference area, where there will be a preference for industrial uses compared to commercial ones. So we will break the framework down into 4 sub-areas and share additional details as we review them one by one. Those are at the waterfront, labeled 1. 2 is the northern portion around Queensbridge Houses. 3, the industrial and commercial area. 4, the mixed use areas to the south and near Court Square, which are considered one group for a breakdown. In the legend to the left, you can see the permitted uses for each of the colored areas along with the proposed density. When we break into discussion rooms after the presentation, each room will be dedicated to one of these sub areas. You have the ability to choose which one or which multiple rooms you would wish to visit. So to give you a better idea of what we mean when we say medium density or highest density, let's see how that compares to today's zoning. Here are images of the area's existing zoning along a spectrum from low density to the left to high on the right. So like I said, the whole area would allow for greater density. So as a starting point, the proposed densities would begin above the existing lowest density buildings in the area. The medium density allowed in the industrial preference is closer to the medium density light manufacturing and residential that's found in Dutch Kills and along 44th Drive. The mixed use zones will start at this medium density and go up. Higher density in the mixed use higher zone would be similar to densities around Court Square today. And in the mixed use highest density zone, that maximum density would allow for a slightly higher density than is allowed in neighboring blocks today. Now let's take that area by area. Starting first at the waterfront, there would be no changes to the use or bulk regulations in the northern half of the waterfront up to Queensbridge houses, or the Queensboro Bridge, excuse me. The portions of that area that have already been rezoned and allow for high density development, including residential use. The existing energy service utility site in this area suggests they have no plans to redevelop, but they are encouraged by the potential revisions to the waterfront access plan and would connect waterfront access across lots. If and when new development does occur on that site, it would be subject to the requirements for new open space. The southern half, shaded in red, is mostly limited to low density and commercial industrial uses today. In this area, higher density mixed use development, including residential with mandatory inclusionary housing, is proposed. The whole area in the blue dotted line would be subject to an updated waterfront access plan. Updates to the existing WAP will be focused on increasing the accessibility and resiliency of the waterfront open spaces and designing for amenities to support a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood. Now let's look at the ways that these land use changes advance community recommendations. Unlike nearby residential developments at Hunters Point South, all new housing allowed under this rezoning will be required to set aside 20 to 30% of its units for income-capped mandatory inclusionary housing. Therefore, allowing for higher density residential buildings also means developers will be required to build more affordable units. Enabling mixed-use development at the water can also support the community's hopes for active ground floors in the area and opportunities for community facilities and additional retail and services here. Another way that this proposed zoning can support community hopes is by incentivizing the development of community facility space. Throughout this process, we have heard hopes for new community facilities, things like a school and a community center. Zoning can incentivize these uses by allowing for additional density just for those community uses. And in response to recommendations to protect the shoreline and build for resiliency, the waterfront access plan will require that the main shore pathway be built to an elevation that is protected from long-term sea level rise. All waterfront buildings are required by the building code to be built to flood resiliency standards that are higher than national FEMA requirements. An updated LIC waterfront access plan can help to ensure that access is open and accessible for all. It can be strengthened by including a variety of natural and engineered climate resilience strategies, and urban design provisions can help to ensure that the waterfront feels continuous, has a variety of activities for relaxation and more active uses, and feels connected to the community. Again, when development occurs on the waterfront, property owners will be required to provide publicly accessible open space along the waterfront. Over time, the plan could eventually create a continuous waterfront esplanade that connects Gantry Plaza State Park to Queensbridge Park. In places where streets end at Vernon Boulevard today, streets would extend to the water, or pathways that are called upland connections will provide waterfront access and a visual link to the water. The waterfront access plan will have design requirements to help ensure that new waterfront open space is accessible to all, and that it includes different types of features like planting, seating, and different types of pathways. Now moving to the next sub-area next to Queensbridge houses. The northernmost blocks, shaded in purple, are within the industrial business zone. A higher density mix of industrial and commercial uses will be permitted here. The city is proposing two changes to the blocks shaded in red that are currently zoned for low density commercial and industrial uses between Queens Plaza North and 41st Avenue. First, new residential use would be permitted with a requirement for MIH. Second, higher density mixed use development will encourage not only more housing, but community facilities and businesses too. We heard a lot of interest in creating an active mixed-use town center next to Queensbridge houses that will offer public housing residents better access to shops and services. We believe that the proposed mixed-use zone can help to accomplish this. So as we move to the purple areas in the center of the study area, these will remain zoned for commercial and industrial uses as they are today. However, allowing for higher densities will support the growth of different kinds of businesses. Within this area, there would be the industrial and commercial area around the edge and the industrial preference area in the middle. The industrial and commercial area along the outer edge will allow for a mix of commercial and industrial uses at higher densities. These areas largely border residential uses. They have proximity to mass transit and support a mix of commercial and institutional uses today, which are compatible with residential uses and can benefit from transit access and increased foot traffic. The risk of industrial displacement in this part of the area is lower, and increasing permitted densities will encourage more investment in these areas. The industrial preference area proposed for the industrial area's center would allow for higher densities than are permitted today, but it would also include a preference for industrial uses over commercial uses. Today, this area has more industrial businesses of all kinds, including food production, film production, the construction supply and staging, and the city wants to preserve and encourage some investment. This new zoning will allow for more job-intensive manufacturing uses that allow us to increase the number of accessible jobs in the area, which in turn bolsters street activity and foot traffic here. Zoning changes will allow for greater flexibility, which would support many of the area's existing industries like film and media. And zoning provisions, along with new investments in street design and transportation infrastructure, will support more orderly curbside delivery, supporting business operations while helping to eliminate conflicts with pedestrian accessibility. How can this proposed zoning help recommendations? We heard a lot from people who felt that the area's current zoning is too restrictive for today's businesses. By incentivizing industrial uses with higher FARs in the industrial preference area, we can help to retain the types of local jobs that pay family-supporting wages and are accessible without college degrees. Industrial preference will also help maintain the district's industrial core, while greater density can allow businesses to grow. So how can you think of industrial preference in the middle versus the industrial and commercial area on the outside edge? In the outer edge, permitted densities would be higher than in the industrial preference area, and the FAR for commercial and industrial would be the same, like on the right. The industrial preference area in the middle, the densities would be a little bit lower than the industrial and commercial area at the edge, and the FAR for industrial uses would be higher than the FAR for commercial uses. So in the image, you can see that a larger building could be built if it includes industrial uses compared to a purely commercial building. And finally, sub-area 4. Under this proposal, the highest density mixed-use area shaded in red around Court Square would allow high-density residential, community facility, commercial, and industrial mixed uses. Along 44th Drive, the mixed-use high-density area shaded in orange would also permit that same mix of uses at a slightly lower density than the downtown zone. The mixed-use medium-density area shaded in dark yellow and the most southern portion of the area would also allow those uses at a medium scale density that helps to transition to contextual heights on the existing buildings outside of the study area. All of the new housing developed in these areas would also be subject to mandatory inclusionary housing, requiring developers set aside between 20 and 30% of all units as permanently income restricted housing. By changing these areas from light manufacturing to mixed-use zones, we believe that we can address multiple community recommendations. First, allowing housing in these areas will encourage the development of new homes, including homes that are income restricted in perpetuity. Higher density housing, where appropriate, near existing transit at Court Square and along 44th Drive, also means more affordable units. Allowing new high and medium density residential in these areas, along with a mix of businesses, services, retail, helps to support the calls we've heard for density along transit corridors and the creation of another kind of town center that will help bring greater street activity and foot traffic to the areas in and around the industrial business zone. Because these areas will permit higher densities for non-residential uses as well, new spaces for community facilities and local businesses will be encouraged. Updating the zoning in this area will allow for simpler ways to mix uses and better designed ground floors to help encourage businesses that serve as local amenities. Finally, mixed uses allowed in this area will support community recommendations to co-locate housing and creative and artist studios. So here is a final look at the study area's existing and proposed zoning side by side before we break out into discussion groups this evening. So now we're going to get ready to break out into groups to speak about this. Each group is going to cover one of these different sub areas that we just went through. Before we jump in, a few community agreements that I'll ask everyone here to please adhere to throughout this evening's conversations. First, please share the airtime. If you've spoken a lot, please take a step back to allow others to join the conversation. Please respect the diverse viewpoints in your discussion tonight. We plan this work collectively because no single person knows everything, and our work is stronger when we work together. To that end, please use I statements where appropriate. If you're speaking from your own experience, please say so. I have experienced, or I see an opportunity for. And finally, I ask folks to please check your negativity bias. Changes in our community can be scary, and often the first reaction may be negative. Please remember, everyone here wants to see a stronger Long Island City. So instead of jumping in with criticism, consider others' ideas, and if you disagree, please dig into that discussion with your clarifying questions. So we will be doing 8 breakout rooms this evening. There's going to be 2 breakout rooms for each of the sub areas that we covered. Groups 1 and 2 will be for the waterfront, 3 and 4 for the north section, 5 and 6 for the industrial and commercial area in the middle, and rooms 7 and 8 for the area around the southern portion and Court Square. Groups that are discussing the same sub area, group 1 and 2 or 5 and 6, all have the same materials. We just wanted to be able to spread out the conversation a little more and give folks more ability to speak. If we end up moving you, it's just because you're in a room that has a lot of people and there's more space in another room of the same topic. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up breakout rooms. If you all need, one more thing. If you need interpretation, please stay in the main room. Do not go into a breakout room. If you don't need interpretation, you're welcome to visit any of these. You'll be able to manually choose which room you want to go to, and you're welcome to join a room and switch rooms midway through. So if you need to know how to use breakout rooms, we're going to open them in a moment. You're going to see a breakout room icon that's a little 2x2 square grid, and then you should be able to choose which group you want to speak in, and they're labeled with the name of the sub area that they'll be discussing. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to facilitators to get going with the breakout rooms and drop the screen share down. So folks, the breakout rooms are now open. If you go to the breakout room menu, you should be able to select your rooms. I see people are joining their rooms already. That's wonderful. Facilitators, note takers, you know which rooms you're assigned to, so please go ahead and join those rooms as well. And if you need interpretation, please do stay in this main channel here with me. So welcome back to the main room, folks. Hopefully there was good opportunity to have strong discussion around the different areas that are proposed in the draft zoning framework this evening. To close out the meeting this evening, we are going to go around to the different folks who are taking notes in the breakout rooms and hear a bit about what was discussed in each. So I will start by just saying there was not activity in the interpretation room in the main channel. And I'm going to first look to Eric. Did group 1 in fact meet? I know that you kind of merged into the group 2 for waterfront, so maybe it makes most sense to hear the summary from Daniel.
Yeah, we did get subsumed into group 2, but I can share one comment before passing over to Dan that I didn't hear in group 2, which was that there should be long-term consideration for the Con Ed site on the northern end of the waterfront to ensure accommodation of continuous waterfront access.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to now pass over to Daniel, if you can share a little bit of what was discussed in group 2, which was discussing the waterfront sub area.
Hi. Yes. So we discussed a variety of topics for the waterfront sub area. I would say, first of all, it was mentioned multiple times how higher density makes sense for this area. You know, on the topic of resiliency for the waterfront, you know, there was a lot of discussion about how, you know, there shouldn't just be seawalls or gray infrastructure solutions here, that it's important to have wetlands and other permeable solutions that have been shown to be effective for climate resiliency. It was brought up for like the Army Corps study, for example, that, you know, those who are not familiar, the harbor and tributaries study by the Army Corps, that it will support comprehensive solutions to climate resiliency. So again, both green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. It was also discussed how, you know, how this density can support vibrancy and how it's important to have that vibrancy, vibrant streets, a lot of pedestrian traffic. There were a couple of examples that were brought up to, you know, to emulate. Like Culture Lab was given as an example of good community space that works in part because it's an industrial form. It was mentioned how like that kind of industrial form can be utilized for those kind of creative community spaces. It was also mentioned, you know, that you know, some of the parks to the south, like Gantry Park, and also like Hunters Point South, are good examples to emulate both on climate resiliency and on good public space. We also had a topic about, you know, making sure that some of the larger blocks in the waterfront are ideally broken up and have public space and are accessible. Let's see what else. We could also mention schools came up. It was mentioned how it makes sense to include more schools in the higher density development areas. But others mentioned that schools should possibly be sited more inland for easier access to all. So that's something that was asked for us to explore, as well as providing near and medium term strategies to activate buildings, you know, so that there's something, you know, something to build on in the short term over the long term plan.
Thanks,
I think that covers most of it.
Thank you. I'm going to check in. So next up, I know group 3 was active, so I'll ask Gary if you can report back a bit of what was discussed in that group, which was discussing the north sub area near Queensbridge houses.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Yeah,
Yep.
thank you. So a great deal of things were discussed within this area. A lot of it very much centered around the concerns of MIH and how, you know, these high densities may start to change neighborhood. Something that had caught our eyes were how, you know, while they would enjoy recreational, they were particularly looking into more indoor recreational, so it could shield them from the elements, and as well as opportunities for industrial cooking and what have you. So things that we don't exactly see on surface, which I thought was fairly interesting. Another thing of discussion was how there should be, or at least ideally, more investment into the NYCHA homes, you know, and how while the MIH 25% would be very beneficial, you know, a person threw out an example where, you know, even if they were to only have a studio for $700, a lot of elders might end up living there. It's actually quite a difficult living expense, especially if you're making under 25K per year. So, so on the flip side, on the other side, you know, people did also voice that while 25% or 20%, somewhere between 20 and 30 might not seem like a lot, it is an overall net positive because we would also be introducing commercial as well as looking into the possibilities of helping, you know, helping people with mental facilities rather than going all the way across the water in the Upper East Side. More specifically, you know, mental health facilities as well as many other things. And I guess one more thing to finalize is also the argument that market rate housing isn't all that bad in these situations because we start to see how certain areas, you know, it starts to attract new people around New York City to help us realize we don't have to live in, you know, these high cost of living targeted areas where you can move across the water into Queens and now you can raise a family and whatnot. So those were very insightful things that I think was worth mentioning. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I'm going to, so as I understood, group 4, Maria, you were the note taker. I think that was inactive. Please just confirm.
Yeah, we had a very short conversation before breaking into the other rooms. I will say we talked about the importance of local small businesses and a preference for some more mixed-use buildings with commercial or industrial ground floors and residential above.
Thanks, Maria. I'll now go to group 5. Katie, can you please report back? And Katie, that was the area discussing industrial and commercial area.
Yeah, so that area encompasses the IBZ. So that really presents a lot of unique needs in the area. So one thing that came up was making sure that we're providing connectivity from Queensbridge houses to the commercial area and ensuring that that connectivity is there. Lived workspaces for artists and affordable spaces for artists also came up. And also support of the life sciences, the biotech, and the film industries was also a common theme. Kind of getting back to the IBZ issue and how all of the different uses need to kind of work together in such a confined space. We talked about getting provisions for loading, like designated delivery areas. Right now we're seeing a lot of trucks parked in bike lanes or double parked, blocking streets, blocking traffic. So really putting attention on that and easing those tensions. And then using ground floor uses that really activate the street rather than having blank walls or things like that. And then lastly, just focusing on streetscape, quality of life issues, getting sidewalks in good working condition, and having really good lighting.
Thanks, Katie. I know that group 6, the other group for that area, did not meet. So I'm going to go to, I think, our final group, group 7, and ask Chow to please report back. And this was the area in the south and around Court Square.
Yeah, so some have a question about the way the boundaries are being drawn and why the density or the distinctions of those the zones are the way they are, and some recommend extending the boundary to be more mixed use. I think some recommend increased density to the highest for within those that is of mid to high density, especially along 44 Drive, Nose Around Transit, and Court Square. But also people have concern about balancing density with capacity for the new populations, infrastructure needs and transportation needs, and the opportunity to extend the rail and subway to serve these needs. And also some have concern about preserving the community look and feel among all of these development pressures in the neighborhood. And also some ask about mechanism and creative ways to increase open space and community spaces and services in the area. And also in create diversity of parks and programs that address a diverse need of people.
Thank you very much, Chow. All right, folks. Thank you all to everybody who joined us this evening to discuss this draft land use framework. As I mentioned, we're excited to begin workshopping this with you, and we'll take back all these comments and ensure that we can try to do our best to address them and ensure that we are developing them into this neighborhood planning work. Just as a final reminder and a note for closeout, if you are not already in the mailing list for this, you can do it by going to licplan.nyc. And I'll say our next meeting is this Monday. It is the same as this meeting. We are having a in-person version of this evening's meeting. So, if you didn't love the virtual format, come back for the in-person. We look forward to seeing you there. We're going to be at MoMA PS1 on Monday evening. I'll be there. I look forward to seeing folks too. Hopefully you all want to come out and see your neighbors and talk more about this draft land use framework, and we'll be excited to do that with you on Monday evening. So thank you all. Have a good evening. And once again, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts.
Have a good night, everyone.